On this episode of A State of Control, we talk about the role of project management, how project managers interact with programmers, the value of relationships and communication, and how to make a project successful. All that and more on A State of Control.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
A state of control.
Support for AVNation is brought to you by
Sure, because every voice matters.
Welcome to A State of Control, an AVNation podcast that highlights the control, automation, and programming aspects of the audiovisual industry. I'm your host, Steve Greenblatt. Thanks for joining us today. We have an exciting show on tap, and we're going to be talking about what I think is an underappreciated aspect of the industry, and that's the area of project management. And of course, because of our show is about control, we're going to be talking mostly about how it pertains to control programming, programmers, and the impact on the overall project. So with that said, I'd like to introduce our guests for today. First off, he is a regular or a repeat guest, let's call it, on this show. His name is Jim Maltese from AVR. How are you, Jim, today? Thanks you for joining us today.
Good, Steve. Doing very well. Good to be back.
Excellent. Next, I'd like to introduce Luke Jordan. Luke is from Electroacoustics, and he has appeared on AV Week, but this is his first chance to enlighten us on A State of Control. Welcome, Luke.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And last but not least, he's a veteran programmer who I know for quite some time. He also manages programmers. He's from Vistacom. His name is Mark Rickley. Welcome, Mark.
Good afternoon, Steve. Thanks for having me on the show today.
You're welcome. Thanks for joining us. So, control system programming involves a lot more than just control programming or writing code, let's say. Programmers need to interface with different people. They need to gather information. They need to define functionality, do field testing, troubleshooting. There's a lot of coordination also that goes into programming. That's often understated. And what I'd like to explore a little bit today is what those pieces are, how they go together, and how we get to a successful outcome. So, Luke, I'm going to actually kick this off with you. You work with clients both on the front end, defining systems, and also on the implementation side and making sure that everything goes as planned. So what are some of the key elements to define and focus on when you're approaching a project that involves control programming?
I think the first thing that is really important is, for a well-integrated system, having a point of control is super important. And, we all want to make it easy. Avixa is working on a standard for UI, and, making sure that it's just easy to use is important. But understanding what problem you're solving, what need, what pain point does a client have that you're addressing? And it might be that they aren't aware, and maybe it's new construction, there is no pain point yet, but by understanding what their problems have been in the past or what their experience has been in the past and drawing them out, that gives you the information you need to design a solution that's going to take care of that. Or if they've got an existing system and you're upgrading to a more modern or more current control system, understanding what their pain points have been and making sure that you don't repeat those same mistakes. So really, it's just a lot of asking questions, and then from a sales engineering perspective, knowing what products and solutions are available to meet those needs, and making sure to draw a really tight connection between those pain points, those problems, and those gotta have it's to the solutions and products that you are able to offer and create.
So Jim, I'll jump over to you. Basically, what Luke is describing is understanding needs, coming up with a scope of work, and really coming up with a design that meets what the client's expectations and is going to be something that's going to work for them. I think one of the key elements also is getting that communicated properly to a programmer. What are some techniques that you've seen that have been successful, and how do you go about that? Because it's often a tricky part of the project.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Luke, and I agree with you. It's a very tricky part of the project. And, I think too often people nowadays rely on the written word, which is a mistake when we have videos, when we have pictures. And for me, in addition to pain points, I think we really need to pay attention to culture and consistency for our end users. And so if they have something they like, we should let the programmer know exactly what it is they like in terms of existing user interfaces, what they use, and not only what they like, but what they don't like. Like if they have the room that no one likes to use, make sure that's captured as well. Package that all up with pictures, with videos, with maybe an interview with the client, and put through to the programmer, this is the level of user. We don't like a lot of buttons. We want that magic one button control system, and that's it. Where flexibility, we're always balancing flexibility and convenience. And so finding that balance of, do they want super users, or do they just want like a rock solid control system that's super easy to use? They might not access everything, but they might not need to. And so understanding that culture of user is going to go a long way as well. But to communicate that, I just think we need to rely on audio and pictures and video, not just an email.
What are some examples that you've seen work with regards? Because I think that's a great idea, and I think showing rather than telling is very, very effective.
Mm-hmm.
But what are some examples of how you've been able to capture a scope in a video?
Yeah, I mean, it seems silly, but I always have my phone, and I've been using a lot of the tablet world as well, because they've kind of come a long way. And it's literally me holding the tablet up at people or at an interface saying, this is great. And maybe I'll circle a picture or something like that. Look at this. This is the room we're in. They like these buttons. They like this flavor of interface. They have this, system in a box, but everyone knows how to use it. And so if we can take this flavor of interface and apply it to an integrated control system, I think that'll go a long way. And it's me, as usual, talking to myself. And I wrap that up. I put it on some shareable drive and get it out to the team.
So Mark, I'm going to use you as our programmer expert, and also our one who probably wrestles with a lot of these challenges often in managing projects and programmers. What are some of the gotchas that you encounter, and what techniques do you use to possibly overcome them when you're approaching a project from a management perspective?
Well, this is actually a great topic, really. Just to touch on some of the points that Luke brought up earlier in regards to the needs analysis. Of identifying what the client's needs are, I think is really the key to a successful completion or an initial interaction with the client. We need to find out what do we need to solve for them, and then once we get that information, it starts off at the basic level. This is our problem, and we work on coming up with the solutions. To touch on what Jim had mentioned, and as in reference to pictures and utilizing video, etc. in our company, we typically don't do that. However, I think that there is something that some value to capturing those instances where you're in front of a client and they have an existing system, or they have some type of an idea of how their system would want to work, and they can actually have that interaction, and a programmer can see that interaction and identify what we can do to give them a program that's developed, that's right for them. One of the things that we do, we don't have that. We currently don't have that. But when it comes down to the clients, we typically will have the sales folks do all of that initial discovery. And then what we do is we start storyboarding all the way to the point of a deliverable program. And during that time, what we will do is we get templates, and we will actually develop a panel, a sample panel that actually works live, and get in contact with the client and actually have them interact with that. So hopefully that answers some of the questions, but there's some really good things to touch on here with some of the things that Luke and Jim have brought up.
And to piggyback off that real fast, and I love that idea of doing like a mock-up touch panel. But a few manufacturers are kind of picking up the baton here, and not only do they show, it's not an interactive touch panel, it's more like a brochure, but they show panels, and when a button is pressed on the panel, which is a graphic in the brochure, it shows what's going on with the room peripherals as well. So they'll have like a dual screen display, and so it says, all right, when you go into this mode, and they'll do some like button press graphic on the touch panel. Then they show, okay, we've got the far end presenter on the left display, the presentation on the right display, and they do some graphic with the audio in the room to show what's going on. And I mean, that's a nice complete picture.
Yeah, I'll piggyback off of all this. This is a great direction, Mark. Kind of in that same vein, I'll typically go out. If the first time I'm working with a client that we know we're going to be doing a few different control projects with, I think that first time, we've been bringing our in-house programmer with us to really get an understanding of the flavor and direction and what the GUI needs to look like. And then we'll build a template, so it's a little more time up front on that first project. But then subsequent projects, I may, but usually don't need that programmer to go with me. So knowing the templates, knowing kind of what their needs and their the way they think is, I can go out and I can understand what's in the room. How do we going to control it? How does it interact? What are the different user needs? And then we can just go in and build that into the template. Our programming costs go down after that first project because the templates, the graphics, the layout, the functionality is all kind of there already. But then we've started kind of the same thing. It's a little more flat, but we'll have a touch panel that has no code, and it's just a layout. And so we'll have, this is what it looks like, this is what you can control from this page. And so we'll have like a description of what every button does, and when you press this, it's just kind of a narrative of what happens as you use the touch panel. And so it gets the graphics, the layout, the user controls, and the functions all in a graphical layout and a narrative, and we'll send that to the client. And so we'll just kind of have a discussion at that point. I like this, I don't like this, I wish it did this, is there another way we could maybe use this? And so by the time the layout is done, we haven't done any coding, but we haven't done any coding that now has to get rewritten or removed. So when we start actually programming the control processor or whatever, every line is meaningful and thought out and approved by the client. So to us, that's been kind of a time saver. We're doing a little bit more up front than we used to, but we're not doing any rework. So that's been a real nice way of looking at it for us.
So I think you bring up some really good points, and these are great techniques. And I'm sure that they could be valuable to a lot of the people listening. And you know, I honestly have not seen some of the graphics that Jim was describing, and I'm going to check them out myself. So, you know, we're focusing a lot on developing that scope, and now the next steps are also to carry out the execution. And a lot of times, and I'm speaking from experience, when you're focusing on programming, you're not really realizing the other aspects potentially within a project that are going to impact your success. How should a programmer be communicating mostly with the project manager? And Luke, I'll send this over to you, to be able to provide updates and get information that may impact their success down the road.
If communication was easy, everyone would stay married and make money. A little bit of Texas humor there. So the biggest thing is just honestly having established lines of communication. So definitely starting at the end, when does this project need to finish? How much time have we sold or allotted or agreed upon for testing? I know sometimes in the past we've sold, kind of before we did the pre-approved layout, is we would sell a control system with 2 layout changes. So if you didn't like the text, you wanted to do this, you wanted to do that, as long as it was fairly minor changes, but we would go ahead and sell time for them to say, oh, we changed our minds, we don't want this, and without being an extra cost because we sold that time for them to change their mind. But if it's got a hard open and, you know, on this date, do we put in that cushion time for them to change their minds and us to reprogram it beforehand? So kind of understanding, working from your finish date going backwards. So now we know, you know, our fabrication shop needs to have all the firmware and connections and everything put together in the shop so that it can go into the field. How long does our production team need in order to program or install everything for our programmer to go out there and start actually testing devices? And yeah, it's amazing how often change orders will happen and the programmer doesn't get a request for, hey, how much more additional time is this going to take? What is this going to require from you? Is this change order even possible within this timeline? You know, and so there's a big disconnect a lot of times between the salesman talking with the client, what the client wants, and then talking with the programmer. And do you have capacity to do this? Do you have time to do this? Is this something we can do in-house, or do we need to outsource this? And that's okay, but we need to know about this. So having maybe a monthly meeting, and then as we get into the last stretch of that project, establishing this is a weekly meeting where we're going to talk about, has anything changed? Is this still the right direction we're going? And having a set established time to get together really makes that world of a difference, but is something that we've gotten wrong a lot of the times, and I know that we're probably not the only ones.
So Jim, I'll pass it off to you. When you're approaching a project and coordinating different trades and really trying to bring things together, a lot of times it's kind of tricky as to how do you know when you're going to need to have a program finished, or when you are going to need to be able to need to involve a programmer, and obviously their time is valuable, as is everybody's. Are there some checks and balances that you put into your process to be able to figure that out, or to create some focus there?
Yeah, I'm gonna write down Luke's quote and probably make it my email signature, but it's just hard. And you have to include it as part of your process, and you have to have a distribution list where if there is any change like that, it goes out to the key stakeholders. And, you know, I always hesitate to rely on tools for process stuff, but at least internally, like, you know, things like Spark and Teams and things like that, where it provides like a sticky place to put that sticky repository where when changes are made or when chats are had, they stay in one spot and people can go back to look at, as opposed to emails that, if you blink in an email, it'll go down to the very bottom and you might not have categorized it or distributed it or blah, blah, blah. But, or Slack, Slack, all those things, I think that's why they were built, is to assist on the communication. And you can add a programmer late in the game, and he can just see everything that's happened, and all the documents reside there, all the meetings can reside there, all the chats can reside there, and we just have to work on ways to make that information sticky, so that they can be referenced later by everyone, and that's the hard part.
Mark, I'll bring you in on this. I'm sure you can relate to a lot of this discussion, and both managing your own projects and also managing projects that other people are doing. How do you make sure that you're meeting your deadlines, and how do you make sure that you're going to be able? How do you measure your capacity and your ability to meet a schedule?
Well, my team that I have, they do a fantastic job at what they do. And one of the things that we've recently actually had it in place for quite some time is that we have actually a software that actually sends out the communications. Now, my development team, they can be on 10, 15, 20 projects, sometimes at 30 projects at a time for one person. Now, the key is to make sure that the communication is going into the right bucket, and when a guy is working at these different levels, they need to be able to have the communications come in, and to be able to process that and understand. As far as deadlines goes, we try to touch on what Jim said. We try to have meetings with the project managers. The real key thing here in regards to the show is that project management and programming, they need to both understand how what each person does and what's their responsibility, and to have a respect between the two to make sure that everything is successful. And so having that clear line of communication with between the teams is a key. But as far as the communications coming in, it needs to go into some type of a system that actually collects the data and puts it into some type of a some type of a thread. Change orders. I think Luke or Jim, I forget, I didn't write it down, but I brought up change orders. That's always the battle that we go through, and understanding, we're going 100 miles an hour down with a project, and then all of a sudden we get a change order. It really just it disturbs us. But again, a project manager should know, okay, hey, I got to bring the programmer in. We need to really look at this a little bit more in detail, because that's what the programmer is looking for, is the really good detail to that change order.
So I'll throw this out there, Mark. I'll follow up on this. Does a project manager need to understand programming? How technical do they need to be effective in working with a programmer or working in this capacity?
To be honest with you, I think that both the programmer and the project manager need to understand what each person does. As far as your question is, that the programmers, the project managers should know some aspects of the programming, of what to look for. A change order comes in and we're swapping out a display. Oh, I know that my programmer needs, that's at a basic level, but I know that my programmer needs, may need to change the code for that. Typically project managers take care of our change order process. Our team does a really great, fantastic job at that. And it's a matter of them understanding what may affect the programmer and other parties, engineering, whatever, fabrication, whatever. They need to kind of understand all aspects of that project and the team that they have.
I'd kind of jump in there, though. I think, Steve, like you said, it's important that the project manager understands what the programmer does, but I don't think that the project manager needs to understand what they do.
How they do it.
Right. They need to know that anything that is in our system that might interface with that programmer, that the programmer needs to be engaged as soon as reasonably possible to discuss, how does this affect you? How does this affect the project? And how can we work together to break down barriers, fix problems, and complete the project successfully? But I don't really think you need to understand hardly anything about programming. It's just another solutions activity. So like, AV solutions largely are not just box shelf commodities with a short sales cycle like retail. It really is a longer sales cycle, a longer completion, from sales to completion. It's a longer process. And so there's just a whole lot of things that are going on, from, MEP to mechanical to low voltage, that can go into a building. And it's such a complex process. You go to any subcontractor meeting on a construction project, and you got 13, 20 different representatives of trades in that meeting, all talking and working together. And so in the same way on an AV project, that programmer is just a small portion of what's going on, and largely important. That's the glue that's tying everything together and how people are engaged and interacted upon by that system. But you just have to know where their scope ties into other parts of that job. And I think, Mark, what you said, having the respect for each other to not just dump it on my programmer at the end and say, hey, things changed, fix it, need it done by Tuesday, but being able to just engage them as soon as possible and, respectfully and appropriately talk about their needs, their concerns, and bring them into that change or that part of the project.
I agree with that, but with that said, there is some value in understanding the scale of changes, and so if you're at a project meeting and the client asks for a seemingly small change that could have a drastic effect on the programming, it would be helpful for the project manager to have that kind of overview understanding of how the program works, so they can say, wow, okay, that's not a big deal. That'll just take 5 minutes to change in the program. Or, oh my God, we have to change the entire structure of the program enterprise-wide to make that happen. And, it's fine that they can go back and check with the programmer and report, but to have that kind of in your back pocket could be very valuable.
I mean, more knowledge is never a bad thing.
Yeah, I think that after many, it all depends on the project manager, but as you start to go through their career of working in the AV industry and being a project manager, you start to get to a point where from experience of what happens with the changes, and I think that's really where I was kind of going with that, is that you don't necessarily need to know all the ins and outs, but it's a matter of knowing really what is really going to affect the programmer while they're sitting at their desk cranking away at code. It's an interesting topic, and I think it really going back to to what you had said earlier about the project manager needs to let the programmer know. Flip it around. The programmer needs to understand that the project manager has deadlines that need to be met, and that's what they are focused on, is the tasks at hand. So that's that relationship back and forth, and understanding the time of what the deliverable is for each project manager and the programmer.
Yeah, and no one wants to work with a jabroni that doesn't communicate, doesn't manage their work well. So partner with good people.
I like that, jabroni. I like that.
Well, these are some great tips, guys. I really appreciate it, and I think that they'd be very helpful. I think a couple of takeaways that I had is keys to success are definitely communication and relationship, which is just good advice in general with regard to business and anything that you do. So, Well, that'll do it for today's show. I'd like to thank you guys for being on. First, I'd like to thank Luke Jordan from Electroacoustics. Thanks for being with us. How can people get in touch with you, learn more about your company, and just chat with you in general?
I'm on Twitter at Luke Jordan, EAVI, or you could check out our website, eavi.com.
Great, thanks. Jim Maltese, thanks for being with us today. How can people get in touch with you, learn more about AVR or anything that you're doing?
Yeah, no, always a good time. You can hit me on Twitter at Jimmy Maltese or avres.com, avres.com.
Great. Thanks for being with us. And last but not least, Mark Ripley, from Vistacom. I hope this was a good experience for you, and thanks for joining us. How can people get in touch with you and learn more about Vistacom?
Well, thank you again for having me. This has really been an exciting show. Folks can reach me on LinkedIn. I don't really have an active Twitter. I'm working on it. So you can reach me on LinkedIn, or you can email me. It's mripley@vistacominc.com. And then that's also our website is vistacominc.com.
Twitter is where the cool kids hang out. So.
Yeah, I did some tweeting, but I'm not too active on there. I'm working on it. All right,
next time. So my name is Steve Greenblatt. I've been your host. I could be reached on social media at Steve Greenblatt. My company, Control Concepts, is at controlconcepts.net. But most importantly, visit avnation.tv. You can find this show and a bunch of other shows, great lineup of weeklies and monthlies from AV Week and Resi Week, which are the weekly shows in those verticals, as well as some of my other favorites, the AV Profession, the IT AV show, Connected. Those are all great shows to pertain to this audience. So check them out. Let us know what you think. Also visit the underwriters who helped to make AVNation possible. Show them your appreciation, and I'm sure that they will continue to support us. So that's it for today for A State of Control. Thanks for being with us.